When the northern world sinks into winter, it does so with a quiet, breathtaking certainty. The sun begins its slow retreat behind the mountains. Shadows lengthen across the icy fjords. The long blue twilight stretches on for hours at a time, until daylight becomes more memory than reality. And yet, in the heart of that darkness, the people of the Norse Northlands carved out something extraordinary. An ancient celebration of warmth, community, and hope called Yule. Tonight, we travel back to the winter of circa 1000 AD, a turning point in the Northlands, when old pagan traditions still pulsed strongly through village life, even as new Christian influences quietly crept along the coastlines. It was an age when the world felt enchanted and perilous all at once. A time when the boundaries between the seen and unseen blurred during the deep midwinter season. And it was in these long, cold nights that the people of the North gathered together to kindle the fires of Yuletide. Imagine stepping outside into the icy breath of a Scandinavian winter. Snow muffles the world, soaking every sound in soft stillness. Pine branches groan under the weight of frost. The sea is a dark mirror reflecting a sky filled with distant stars. And from across the valley, a faint golden glow flickers beneath the swirling snow, the unmistakable light of a longhouse hearth. Inside, families and neighbors have begun to assemble for the days of feasting and storytelling that define their most important winter festival. Yule was not merely a holiday, it was an anchor, a lifeline, a promise that even in the harshest season, where cold, hunger, and darkness loomed ever-present, the warmth of community would endure. At its heart, Yule marked the turning of the year, the slow return of the sun, and the belief that life, like the seasons, would continue its eternal cycle. These winter celebrations were woven deeply into the Norse relationship with nature, gods, and ancestors. Every fire lit, every toast raised, every evergreen bough hung carried meaning. And unlike our modern winter holidays, which last a single day or a handful of weeks, Yule in the Viking Age was a season. Preparations could stretch for days. Feasting continued night after night. Old stories were told and retold. Songs rose from the smoky air of the longhouse. The crackle of the fire became the heartbeat of the community. Children listened wide-eyed to tales of Odin's wild hunt sweeping through the sky, while elders offered toasts to Freya, Thor, and the spirits who protected the land. This was a world illuminated not by electric lights or glowing screens, but by flame, hearth fire, torches, tallow candles, pitch-soaked pine knots blazing in the cold air. Most of what the Norse knew, remembered and believed during the Yule season, was shared around those fires, passed from voice to voice in the smoky, half-dark. Over the next hour, we will leave behind the modern world and step into that firelit past. We will explore the Yule feast as it might have been experienced by farmers, jarls, traders, and travelers throughout the Norse lands. We will wander into longhouses thick with the scents of roasting meats and spiced ale. We will listen to the skalds, gaze at the runic charms carved into beams and doors, and feel the tremble of horses as legends whisper of Odin riding across the winter sky. Before we begin our journey, before the long night opens its gates, I would love to know, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Your comments help shape these holiday history journeys, and I'm always fascinated to see how far around the globe these cozy winter tales travel. So settle into your comfiest chair, Wrap yourself in a blanket, pour a warm drink if you have one, and let's kindle the fire together. Because as we'll soon discover, Yule was more than a midwinter festival. It was a celebration of endurance, a moment of unity, a season where the Norse people honored their gods, their ancestors, and the quiet resilience that allowed them not only to survive the darkest time of year, but to celebrate through it. Part 1. The World of the Norse Northlands. To understand Yuletide as it was celebrated around the year 1000, we must first understand the world that shaped it. The rugged, breathtaking, and often unforgiving northern landscape that the Norse people called home. Winter in these lands was not simply a season. It was a force, a presence, a challenge woven into every part of life. And as the snow thickened, as the fjords iced over, and as daylight shrank to a fleeting glimmer, life moved indoors into the warm, communal heart of the settlement, the longhouse. If you were to travel through the Norse Northlands in midwinter, you would witness some of the most dramatic scenery in the world. Towering mountains cloaked in snow, vast stretches of dark evergreens clinging to the slopes, jagged, icy coastlines beaten endlessly by waves, fjords, those long, narrow inlets carved by ancient glaciers, cut deep into the land, creating isolated pockets of settlement where small communities huddled together for survival. But beauty alone does not tell the story. Winter in the far north is long, hard, and deeply felt. The sun barely lifts above the horizon, if at all. In some regions, the only daylight is a dim, hazy twilight, the so-called blue hour that lingers for much of the day. Snow can fall in thick, heavy veils, and storms blow in with little warning, bringing winds that howl like spirits racing across the frozen sea. For the Norse, nature was not a distant concept. It was alive, it was powerful, it was something to respect. And so Yuletide, the celebration at the heart of this dark season, became a way of acknowledging those forces, honoring them, and seeking their favor. Daily life revolved around the farmstead, a cluster of buildings that supported a single extended family. The centerpiece was the longhouse, an elongated wooden hall where everyone slept, ate, worked, and gathered around the fire. Along the coasts and fjords, fishers and traders might build their homes close together, forming small villages. Inland farmsteads were often more spread out, separated by forests and fields that became difficult to cross in winter. Society itself was layered. At the top stood the jarls, the noble families who controlled large areas of land and commanded respect and allegiance. Beneath them were the carls, free farmers who represented the backbone of Norse society, hard-working, self-sufficient people who managed their own land, livestock and household. At the bottom were the thralls, enslaved laborers whose work was essential to the functioning of the farm. But winter had a way of leveling those distinctions, at least within the longhouse. When the storms came and the days narrowed into darkness, everyone needed the warmth of the hearth. Everyone depended on one another to survive until spring. And during the Yule feast, even the thralls shared in the food and drink, an acknowledgement that for a brief time, all members of the household were part of the same community. The Norse were no strangers to hardship, but winter demanded a special kind of endurance. Food stores had to last for months. Livestock required shelter and care. The cold was relentless, finding its way through gaps in wood and leather, chilling fingers and toes even by the fire. illness spread easily, travel was dangerous, and above all, the darkness weighed heavily on the mind. This was a world where the sun's absence felt personal, where people watched the sky anxiously, waiting for any sign of its return, and where the longest nights were believed to be the moments when the boundaries between worlds thinned. The Norse believed in unseen forces, spirits of ancestors, wandering ghosts, land spirits called landvettir, and gods whose presence shaped the fate of mortals. Winter amplified these beliefs. The howling wind might be Thor wrestling with a frost giant. A sudden creak in the rafters might be a spirit passing overhead. A strange light in the sky might be the first flicker of the wild hunt. Yule, then, was not simply a celebration. It was a spiritual necessity. It provided a rhythm to winter, a sense of purpose when the world seemed to sleep. The rituals, feasts, and gatherings of the season gave the community something to look forward to and something to hold on to. Much of winter life unfolded around the longhouse hearth, a central fire that served as both a gathering place and a survival tool. It provided heat, light, and a place to cook. It was a symbol of life in a landscape of cold. During Yuletide, the hearth took on even deeper meaning. Fires were stoked higher. Precious stores of firewood were burned more freely. And every family hoped their hearth flame would remain strong as the old year faded and the new one approached. In many homes, a log might be chosen with care, the precursor to what later traditions would call the Yule log. It would be set in the fire and kept burning as long as possible, a symbol of protection against misfortune in the coming year. Even in winter, Norse communities were not isolated from the wider world. Traders, seafarers, and messengers traveled between settlements when conditions allowed. Coastal communities might see ships arrive from distant regions, bringing goods and stories from across the North Sea and beyond. This connectivity influenced Yuletide as well. Customs blended, feasting traditions spread. People shared new ways of honoring gods and ancestors. And through this exchange, the Yule season gradually transformed into something both uniquely Norse and broadly connected to Germanic winter celebrations. For all its hardships, winter also held profound beauty. The shimmer of frost on pine branches, the quiet of snow-covered fields, the strange ethereal glow of the northern lights. Long winter nights encouraged reflection, storytelling, creativity, and memory. And this emotional landscape made Yule especially significant. It was a moment to pause, give thanks, and reconnect with the cycles of nature. A moment to acknowledge those who had passed. A moment to seek strength from the gods. But above all, it was a moment of togetherness. A time when the entire community, family, friends, neighbors, guests, came together to share warmth, food, music, and faith in the returning sun. In the Norse Northlands of the year 1000, winter may have been formidable, but Yule transformed it. Darkness became an opportunity for light. Cold became an excuse for closeness. And isolation became a celebration of community. Part 2. Origins of Yule in the Old Norse Cosmos. To understand Yuletide as it was celebrated in the Norse Northlands around the year 1000, we must step into a spiritual world that felt as real to its people as the snow beneath their boots. The Norse did not separate the physical from the divine. Their cosmos was layered, shifting, and alive, filled with gods who wandered the skies, spirits who moved through forests and fields, and ancestors whose presence lingered in the glow of the hearth. Yule rested at the center of this great cosmic tapestry, drawing its meaning from forces far older than the Viking age itself. Long before the sagas were written, long before Norse culture took the shape we recognize today, the peoples of Northern Europe held feasts in the depths of winter. These early rites, rooted in the ancient Germanic world, grew from the need to survive the harshest season and to acknowledge the fragile balance between darkness and light. Over centuries, as communities settled, traded, and shaped their beliefs, these early rituals evolved into Yule, a midwinter festival that blended myth, survival, and reverence. At the heart of Yule stood the old gods, whose presence shaped every crackle of the fire and every whisper of the wind. Odin, the All-Father, loomed especially large during this season. While remembered today for wisdom, poetry, and battle, Odin's winter aspect carried an air of mystery and dread. Norse tradition held that he led the wild hunt during Yule, a spectral procession sweeping through the night sky. Villagers believed the thunder of hooves across the clouds was not mere storm, but Odin riding Sleipnir, his 8-legged horse, followed by a host of restless spirits. To see the hunt was to risk being taken by it, and many stayed indoors to avoid drawing the attention of the riders. Yet Odin was not simply feared, he was honored. Some placed small offerings outside their doors, hoping the All-Father would bless their home rather than pass it by in judgment. But Odin was only one voice in the divine chorus of Yule. Thor, with his unmatched strength and thunderous presence, served as a protector during the dark months. Where Odin traveled unpredictably through the night sky, Thor was the steady guardian of the household. Many families called upon him during Yule to shield them from the dangers of the season, from biting cold to malevolent spirits. Symbols of his hammer were carved above doorways or traced in the air during blessings, not out of ceremony, but out of genuine belief that Thor's presence could anchor the home against harm. The solstice season also brought renewed attention to gods tied to fertility, rebirth, and the returning sun. Freyr, with his warm and benevolent presence, was central to this moment in the year. His golden-bristled boar, shining like the first rays of the new sun, became a potent symbol of hope. Families toasted Freyr for peace and prosperity, believing that honoring him during the longest night would ensure brighter days ahead. Freya, powerful in magic and love, was invoked for protection of the household and the heart. And Frigg, steady and wise, represented the sanctity of the home itself, vital during a season defined by togetherness. All of this divine presence culminated in a profound understanding of the solstice. To the Norse, the winter solstice was not an astronomical event, but a moment of cosmic rebirth. They watched the days grow shorter, felt the darkness settle heavier across the land, and sensed that the world had reached a turning point. When the sun stood still and prepared to climb higher once more, it signified the death and rebirth of the light. Fires burned brighter than usual during this time, not purely for warmth, but to echo the sun's struggle and triumph. Every flame symbolized the hope that the light would return, slowly but surely. The spiritual significance of Yuletide deepened further with the belief that the boundaries between worlds thinned during these long nights. The Norse understood existence as a series of interwoven realms: Asgarda, Midgarda, Vanaheima, Jotunheimer, and others, connected by the Great World Tree, Yggdrasil. During Yule, these realms felt closer together. Ancestors were believed to walk nearer to the living, drawn by the warmth of the hearth and the offerings placed in their honor. Families welcomed them with quiet gestures. An empty seat at the fire, a slice of bread left untouched, a spoken blessing carried softly into the flames. But not all beings who crossed into the human world were welcome. Restless spirits wandered the winter landscape, and malevolent forces were thought to move freely in the cold moonlit hours. The land itself held spirits, landvetir, who protected forests, mountains, and fields but demanded respect. Household spirits, too, were especially active during Yule. These small, unseen guardians watched over the home, but could grow irritable if neglected. Offerings of porridge, milk, or bread were left out to ensure their goodwill. In this worldview, the cosmos was never distant. It pressed in on daily life, especially during Yule. Every sound outside the longhouse could be interpreted as a sign. The creak of a beam, the rise of a sudden wind, the flicker of a flame. These moments held meaning. Farmers, travelers, and families saw themselves as participants in a living, breathing universe where gods and spirits walked close. Thus, Yule became more than a feast, more than a seasonal pause. It became a spiritual hinge in the year, a time when the Norse honored the forces that shaped their world, sought protection for the months of cold ahead, and celebrated the rebirth of the sun. It was a festival of stories and omens, of offerings and toasts, of reverence and awe. Part 3. The Yule season, timing, length, and progression. Yuletide in the Norse world was not confined to a single day, nor even to a predictable range of dates. Instead, it unfolded as a season, elastic, atmospheric, and shaped by the natural world rather than by a rigid calendar. Its timing drifted with the moon, the weather, and the traditions of each community. To understand how Yule was celebrated around the year 1000, we must step into a world where time was measured in seasons and celestial signs rather than by numbered squares on a page. For the Norse, the heart of Yule was the midwinter blot, a sacred sacrificial feast held around the time of the winter solstice. Most communities recognized this moment, the longest night of the year, as the point when Yule began in earnest. People marked the solstice not by an exact date, but by observation, watching the sun climb lower and lower in the sky until, at last, it paused before returning on its slow upward path. The blot celebrated this turning point in the cosmic wheel, offering thanks for the sun's eventual return, and giving honor to the gods and ancestors who were believed to watch over the household. Yule itself often stretched on for many days. Some communities observed it for 3 nights. Others extended the celebration across 12, or even longer, if storms or scarcity influenced the rhythm of the season. Travel during winter was unpredictable, and if fierce weather kept guests confined to a longhouse longer than expected, the feast simply adapted. In some regions, the season spilled naturally into early January, with no sense of hurry and no need for precise boundaries. Yule expanded or contracted as the landscape allowed. Yet, despite its flexibility, the season tended to follow a recognizable pattern. The weeks leading up to Yule were a period of intense preparation, both practical and spiritual. In the final days of autumn, households brewed ale and mead, knowing these drinks would be central to the celebrations. Livestock that could not be sustained through winter were slaughtered, their meat preserved or prepared for the feast. Clothing was mended, new garments were finished, and boots were reinforced against the coming snow. Firewood was stockpiled in great heaps, so the hearth could burn without interruption. Longhouses were swept, rearranged, and decorated with evergreen branches, carved wooden symbols, and small tokens meant to invite good fortune. When the solstice finally arrived, the atmosphere changed. The Norse understood the solstice as the longest and most mysterious night of the year, a moment when darkness reached its peak and then, almost imperceptibly, began to recede. Many families selected a special log to burn on this night, believing it would bring protection through the dangerous winter. Fires were stoked higher than usual, their light pushing back against the deep blue world outside. Children listened eagerly to stories, elders murmured blessings and charms, and the entire household felt the significance of the moment as both an ending and a beginning. Once the longest night had passed, the joyous heart of Yule opened fully. Feasting began in earnest, and with it came a sense of relief and celebration. Roasted meats were brought forth, especially the Yule boar, whose presence honored the gods of fertility and abundance. Fish, cheeses, breads, and stored vegetables filled the longhouse with rich, comforting aromas. Freshly brewed ale and mead flowed freely. The air crackled with warmth and noise, laughter, clinking cups, songs rising above the crackle of the fire. During this festive period, travel between farmsteads resumed whenever the weather allowed. Guests arrived wrapped in cloaks dusted with snow, stamping their boots at the threshold before stepping into the golden glow of the longhouse. Visitors brought small tokens, perhaps a carved wooden figure, a loaf of bread, or some other simple but meaningful gift. These exchanges were not formalized, but they carried a deep sense of goodwill. Hospitality, after all, was sacred in the Norse world. A guest was to be fed, warmed, and welcomed, no matter their social standing or the hardships of the season. For several nights, the celebrations ebbed and flowed. Music filled the hall as skalds recited poems or recounted heroic tales. Children played games with carved toys or listened wide-eyed to stories of gods, giants, and spirits that walked the winter world. Adults paused to reflect on the past year, raising cups in toasts that honored the gods, their ancestors, and the strength of their community. Yet Yule was not solely a season of joy. It was also a time steeped in a sense of mystery and caution. Certain nights were believed to be alive with heightened spiritual activity. The borders between the worlds grew thin, allowing ancestors to pass close to the living and spirits to wander freely. Families left small offerings on the table or near the hearth to welcome their forebears, while charms were hung above doors to guard against unwelcome forces. Children were kept indoors, warned not to stray far from the longhouse during these enchanted nights. Even animals, especially horses, were thought to sense the presence of the unseen. A sudden shudder or nervous snort might be interpreted as a sign that a spirit had passed nearby. As Yule drew to a close, life settled into a gentler rhythm. The feasts quieted, the last of the guests returned to their homes, and households turned their attention to the remainder of winter. The early days of January became a time of reflection and resetting. People tended their animals, repaired their tools, and found small comforts in routine. The longhouse was cleaned, decorations taken down, and the hearth returned to its normal daily flicker instead of the roaring blaze of the feast. Yet the spirit of Yule lingered. Even after the last cup had been drained and the final story told, the sense of togetherness endured. The season left behind a memory of warmth and unity, a shared strength that would help carry the community through the hardest stretch of the winter still ahead. Part 4. The Longhouse. At midwinter, daily life and decorative traditions. If the Northlands were defined by snow, wind, and long hours of darkness, the Norse longhouse was the answer to all three. It stood at the centre of the farmstead like a vessel, thick, sturdy, and warm against the harsh winter world outside. During Yuletide, it became something even more. A sacred glowing heart where the entire rhythm of the season played out. The longhouse sheltered stories, laughter, rituals, and the steady pulse of the hearth, drawing everyone together beneath its timbered roof. To understand Yule, we must step through its doors and feel the atmosphere as it would have been experienced by those who lived 1,000 winters ago. Walking into a longhouse in midwinter was like stepping from one world into another. Outside, the air bit sharply at the skin, and snow muffled every sound. Inside, everything was warm, dim, and alive. The first thing one would notice was the smell. A mixture of wood smoke, roasting meat, damp wool drying near the fire, and the faint earthy scent of straw laid across the floor. The longhouse itself stretched like an inverted ship, a narrow, elongated hall built from timber planks and turf walls that helped insulate against the cold. The rafters soared overhead, blackened from decades of smoke. In the centre of the hall ran a long fire pit, recessed into the ground and lined with stones. Smoke curled upward and drifted through openings in the roof, creating a hazy, dreamlike atmosphere. The fire was tended constantly, day and night, and during Yule it burned especially bright. Along both sides of the longhouse stood raised wooden platforms covered in furs, woolen blankets, and woven mats. These were the beds and sitting areas for the family. By day, people sat along these benches to work, talk, or eat. By night, they became their sleeping spaces. Storage chests carved wooden tools, and household goods lined the walls. Piles of firewood, barrels of ale, sacks of grain, bundles of herbs and tools repaired in preparation for the season. Light came mostly from the central hearth, but families also used tallow candles and oil lamps to brighten corners of the hall. Their glow was warm and flickering, casting shadows that danced across the beams, like ancient spirits moving through the smoke. On nights when storms raged outside, the longhouse felt even more like a sanctuary. The wind might howl along the roofline and whip snow against the walls, but inside the fire crackled steadily, warming hands and hearts alike. Though the Norse lacked the ornate Christmas decorations we know today, their homes were far from plain during Yule. Each object, each sprig of greenery, carried meaning. The long, dark season called for small, symbolic acts of beauty and protection. Evergreen branches, spruce, pine, and fir were gathered from the forest and hung along rafters, doorways, and posts. Their bright needles brought the promise of life enduring through winter, and their sharp scent filled the longhouse with freshness. In some regions, families crafted sun wheels or small woven ornaments, symbols of the returning light. These might be hung above doors or placed near the hearth. Some households displayed carved wooden idols, representing gods like Thor, Freyr, or Frigg. These figures were not meant as decoration alone. They served as protective guardians and points of spiritual focus during the season. Small offerings of bread, fat, or ale might be placed nearby in gratitude. Charms carved with runes were tucked discreetly into the beams or hung near thresholds. These runic marks were believed to guard against wandering spirits and ill fortune, a precaution especially important during Yule, when the veil between worlds was thought to be thin. The symbols might be simple, just a few angular strokes carved with a careful hand, but they held deep meaning. Even the ordinary objects of the longhouse were arranged with care during Yule. Fresh straw was spread across the floor to create a sense of renewal. Tables were polished and cleared to make way for feasting. Skins and cloaks were shaken out and hung where they could dry in the warmth of the fire before the gatherings began. Every element, no matter how humble, contributed to the transformation of the longhouse into a warm and sacred space. During Yuletide, families wore their best winter clothing, not only for warmth, but to honor the significance of the season. Winter garments were made from layers of wool and fur, carefully woven or sewn by hand during the long months of dark. Cloaks lined with sheepskin or reindeer hide hung heavily from the shoulders. Thick mittens, hats, and boots protected hands and feet from the cold. Even indoors, people often kept on several layers. The longhouse was warm, but the winter chill had a way of lingering around the edges. Children wore small tunics and thick wool socks, their cheeks rosy from the heat of the hearth. Adults donned belts, brooches, and sometimes simple jewelry, bronze arm rings or decorative pins that held cloaks in place. These little touches elevated the everyday routine into something festive. The overall atmosphere inside the longhouse during Yule was one of closeness. The air shimmered with warmth, fires crackled and popped, shadows swayed across the walls. The sound of chatter blended with the clinking of cups and the occasional burst of laughter. Even quiet moments, when someone tended the fire or stirred a pot, felt rich with meaning, framed by the golden glow of the hearth. At mealtimes, the hall grew lively and loud. People gathered on the benches, leaning close as they ate and exchanged stories. The rhythmic hum of voices filled the space like music. In the evenings, with the outside world cloaked in darkness, the longhouse seemed to exist in its own timeless bubble, a refuge where the cold could not intrude and where the magic of the season felt almost tangible. More than any decoration, garment, or ritual, the hearth defined the Yuletide longhouse. Its fire was quite literally the soul of the household. During Yule, the hearth flame was treated with special reverence. Families believed that as long as the fire burned brightly through the darkest nights, their home would be protected. The glowing embers represented the sun's power, the life of the family, and their connection to the gods who governed light and warmth. Watching the fire, one might feel as though the entire world had narrowed to a single glowing point, the place where survival met spirit. Someone was always tending the fire during Yule, whether an elder adding a log, a child poking at the coals, or a parent adjusting the pot suspended over the flame. The hearth never sat neglected. It was the centerpiece of cooking, storytelling, crafting, and celebration. In many ways, everything that defined Yule, The feasting, the songs, the rituals, the gatherings radiated outward from this central fire. It held the home together, not only with heat, but with shared meaning. Part 5. Feasting, food and drink. If the hearth was the soul of the longhouse during Yuletide, then feasting was its heartbeat. The Norse understood that winter demanded preparation, endurance and caution, but they also understood the power of joy. The Yule feast was a declaration that, despite the deep cold outside, warmth and abundance could still be found within the walls of the home. It was a reminder that winter, however long and dark, could not extinguish the spirit of the community. During Yule, the longhouse transformed from a place of daily work into a hall of celebration. The fire glowed brighter, benches were pulled close, tables were laden with food, and the hall filled with smells so rich and earthy that they seemed woven into the very beams overhead. Food during the Yule feast reflected both the bounty of the year and the reality of winter living. Families prepared dishes that were hearty, nourishing, and rooted in the cycles of the farmstead. The centerpiece of many Yule feasts was the Yule boar, usually a pig slaughtered in the late autumn and prepared in midwinter. This was no ordinary dish. It carried powerful symbolic meaning. The boar was closely associated with Freya, the god of fertility, sunlight, and peace. Serving it at the feast was a way of honoring him and welcoming the return of the sun. The boar's golden bristles in mythic tradition reflected the rising glow of the solstice sun, and eating its meat was believed to strengthen the community for the year ahead. Alongside the boar, households served roasted lamb, smoked fish or salted herring, depending on what the farmstead specialized in. Coastal communities prepared fish dishes rich with brine and smoke, while inland families relied more heavily on livestock. Preserved meats, hung for weeks in cool storage rooms or smokehouses, were brought down and sliced thickly for the feast. Cheeses aged in cellars were set on wooden boards. Freshly baked flatbreads appeared alongside hearty loaves flavored with barley or rye. Bowls of root vegetables, carrots, turnips, and onions were stewed into warm, fragrant dishes softened by herbs preserved in the autumn. Honey, treasured for its rarity and sweetness, occasionally found its way into glazes or baked treats. Salt and fat, precious commodities, were used generously for the feast. Every dish carried a sense of celebration, but also a sense of gratitude. Winter was long, food stores needed to last, and every bite carried the weight of both survival and joy. No Yule feast was complete without drink. Brewing was both an art and a necessity in Norse society, and the resulting ale and mead held deep cultural significance. These drinks warmed the body, loosened the tongue, and strengthened the bonds between those gathered. Ale, brewed from barley or other grains, was the most common beverage. Mead, made from fermented honey, was more precious and often reserved for special occasions like Yule. Both drinks were brewed weeks or even months in advance to ensure they were ready for the season. During the feast, cups were filled and refilled, creating a steady hum of warmth and conviviality. But drinking was not merely recreational, it was ritualistic. The Norse observed the tradition of the symbol, a ceremonial round of toasts that marked Yule with meaning and intention. The first toast often honored the gods: Odin for wisdom and protection, Thor for strength and safety, Freya for prosperity and sunlight. The second toast was offered to the ancestors, inviting their presence and guidance. The third celebrated the living, the household, the community, the people whose shared labor carried them through the hardest seasons. These ritual toasts wove together past, present, and future in a single thread. As the night deepened, laughter grew louder, stories more dramatic, songs more heartfelt. The fire threw golden light across faces, illuminating features softened by warmth and drink. In moments like these, the longhouse felt like the center of the world, a place where time slowed and worries melted beneath the glow of the hearth. Food and drink were only part of the feast. Yuletide was a time when the oral traditions of the Norse came alive, filling the longhouse with sound and imagination. Skalds, poets, and performers were revered for their ability to shape words into something powerful. They recited sagas of old heroes, tales of gods and giants, or stories woven specifically for the night's celebration. Their rhythms rose and fell with the crackle of the fire. Children sat wide-eyed, adults nodded along to familiar verses, and guests listened in reverent quiet or joined in with hearty exclamations. Music drifted through the hall as well. Simple instruments like lyres, flutes, and drums, crafted from wood, hide, and bone, added texture to the night. Songs lifted spirits and unified the room, creating a shared landscape of sound. Between stories and songs, people played games and competitions. Wrestling matches, tests of strength, and friendly challenges might spring up in the cleared spaces near the hearth. Even in the depths of winter, the Norse found ways to bring energy and movement into their celebrations. Above all, the Yule feast was an act of unity. Every person present, family members, guests, travelers, and even thralls, shared in the food and drink. It was one of the few times each year when social divisions softened. Around the table, everyone was warmed by the same fire and nourished by the same meal. Sharing food during Yule symbolized the community's resilience. It showed that despite the scarcity winter threatened, the household was strong enough to offer abundance. It was a statement of hope, that the stores would last, the sun would return, and the land would awaken again in spring. Moments of stillness were scattered among the lively celebration. Someone might pause, cup in hand, to gaze thoughtfully into the fire. A parent might wrap a wool blanket around a dozing child. An elder might murmur a quiet blessing, speaking words that had been whispered during Yule for generations. In these quieter moments, the heartbeat of the feast became clear. Yule was not only about indulgence, it was about marking time, recognizing the turning of the year, and reaffirming the ties that bound the community together. Part 6. Magic, mysticism, and the supernatural beliefs of Yule. Yuletide in the Norse world was a time of feasting and fellowship, but it was also a season steeped in mystery. The long nights, the fierce winds, and the moonlit snowfields created a landscape where the boundary between the seen and unseen felt perilously thin. For the people of the Northlands, this was not poetic imagination, it was reality. They believed the world was filled with spirits, ancestors, gods, and forces that could move freely during the deep midwinter. To live through Yule was to inhabit a world alive with magic. As the darkest nights closed in, the Norse believed that the unseen world drew near. During Yule, this connection intensified. The solstice, the turning of the year, and the ritual fires contributed to an atmosphere charged with spiritual power. Ancestors, they believed, were especially active during this time. Families prepared their longhouses as though guests might arrive not only from neighbouring farmsteads, but from beyond the grave. A seat by the fire might be left open. A piece of bread or slice of meat might be placed quietly near the hearth. Some households poured a small amount of ale onto the ground as an offering, murmuring words meant to welcome the spirits of loved ones who had passed on. These ancestral visitors were not feared. They were embraced. They were protectors, guides, and reminders of the lineage that shaped the living. Their presence brought warmth and comfort. But not all spirits were benevolent. Wandering ghosts, known by many regional names, were believed to drift across the winter landscape. Some were thought to be the restless dead, souls who had not found peace. Others were glimpsed only as flickering shapes in the edge of vision, or heard as faint footsteps on snow. The Norse viewed the world as layered and alive, and during Yule, those layers were as thin as ice. Then there were the landvetter, the spirits of the land itself, creatures tied to forests, mountains, rivers, and fields. They protected the land, but could become mischievous or even dangerous if disrespected. During Yule, people honored them with offerings, ensuring the farmstead remained in their good favor. And within the home, the house spirits known later as Nisse or Tomte were believed to watch over the household. Often imagined as small, bearded figures, they were protective but quick to anger if neglected. Families left them bowls of porridge or small gifts during Yule, hoping to secure their blessing for the year ahead. These beliefs wove together into a world in which the supernatural was not distant but close, woven into the beams of the longhouse and the snowdrifts outside. Given the potent spiritual atmosphere of Yule, protective rituals were essential. The Norse were practical as well as mystical. They believed that preparation and respect kept the household safe during the season when spirits walked freely. One of the most common forms of protection involved runic magic. Runes were more than letters. They were symbols infused with meaning and power. Carving a simple rune above a doorway, tracing ones into the air with a finger, or etching it onto a piece of wood or bone could be a powerful defense. Families might carve protective runes into the beams near the hearth or the posts around the entrance, creating an invisible shield around the home. People also relied on charms and amulets, sometimes crafted months in advance. A piece of iron hung near a door could repel malevolent forces. A pouch filled with herbs, yarrow, juniper, or angelica, might be tied to a child's cloak. Women skilled in cedar, the Norse magical tradition associated with Freya, used divination and ritual gestures to sense danger or call for protection. During Yule, some households designated a night for quiet warding, a practice in which the fire was tended carefully while spoken blessings were whispered into the flames. The crackle of burning wood was thought to carry those prayers upward, dispersing them throughout the home. Even everyday tasks could become protective rituals. Sweeping the threshold, arranging evergreen branches along a wall, or lighting a new candle at dusk, all carried layers of symbolism and intention. Magic was not separate from life. It lived within it. Among all the supernatural forces believed to roam during Yule, none loomed larger than the Wild Hunt. This legendary phenomenon, part storm, part omen, part ghostly procession, captured the imagination and fear of Norse communities. Led by Odin, the Allfather, the The wild hunt was said to sweep across the night sky during the darkest winter nights. Some described it as a thunderous host of spectral riders, their cloaks streaming behind them like storm clouds. Others imagined it as a swirling tempest of horses, wolves, and the souls of the restless dead. The sound of howling wind might be taken as the hunt's arrival. The sudden silence afterward felt like its passing. For the Norse, the wild hunt was not just a story. It was a very real danger. To be caught outside when the hunt thundered overhead was to risk being swept away, cursed, or marked for misfortune. Doors were barred tightly. Fires were kept burning. Children were warned not to peek outdoors if they heard the wind rush past. Yet the wild hunt was not simply malevolent. Some believed it could bring blessings to those who honored the gods. A household might leave a bit of hay or grain outside for Sleipnir, Odin's 8-legged horse, hoping the gesture would earn them protection in the coming year. This practice, centuries later, would echo faintly in traditions of leaving treats for Santa's reindeer. The wild hunt embodied everything Yuletide represented: awe, fear, magic, and wonder. Yule was considered an auspicious time for dreams and visions. Because the veil between worlds was so thin, people believed that dreams carried messages from ancestors, from gods, or from the deeper currents of fate. A dream about fire, water, or a journey could be interpreted as a sign of the year to come. Those skilled in divination used runes, carved staffs, or other sacred objects to seek insight. Yule offered a rare opportunity to glimpse the future, but these rituals were treated with caution. Knowledge of fate was powerful and sometimes unsettling. Even ordinary people might find themselves paying closer attention to subtle signs. A sudden crack in a frozen pond, the flight of a raven, the way the smoke drifted from the hearth. Any natural occurrence might be interpreted as a message. The entire season shimmered with meaning. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Yuletide magic is its duality. It was at once a festival of warmth and a vigil against the unknown. The joy of feasting existed alongside the fear of wandering spirits. The laughter of children mingled with whispered charms for protection. The bright fires inside the longhouse glowed against a night filled with myth and uncertainty. For the Norse, Yule was a time to celebrate, but also to watch, listen, and respect the forces that moved unseen across the winter landscape. Part 7. The Shift Toward Christianity. By the year 1000, the Norse world stood at a crossroads. For centuries, the people of the Northlands had honored their gods with offerings, feasts, and rituals woven deeply into the land itself. But change had been stirring, steadily, quietly, and then with sudden force. Christianity, carried by missionaries, kings, traders, and travelers, had begun to take root across Scandinavia. And as the new faith spread, it encountered the most cherished festival of the Norse world, Yule. The meeting of these two traditions, ancient pagan customs and emerging Christian practices, was not a single moment, but a gradual blending, sometimes harmonious, sometimes tense, and always complex. The late Viking Age was marked by transformation. In Denmark, Norway, and parts of Sweden, Christian kings sought to unify their realms, and adopting the new faith became a political tool as much as a spiritual one. Missionaries traveled across the north, preaching from newly built churches and offering the promise of salvation. Merchants brought new ideas from Christian Europe. Even the sagas, written down later, reflect a world where old and new beliefs existed side by side. But conversion in Scandinavia was rarely sudden. It often occurred in waves. One family might adopt Christianity while their neighbours remained devoted to the old gods. A chieftain might order a church built on his land, yet still host a blot during midwinter to appease local spirits. Many Norse people found themselves navigating two overlapping spiritual landscapes, treating Christianity and their ancestral traditions not as opposites, but as layers. And nowhere was this tension more visible than during the Yule season. When Christianity encountered the Yule festival, something fascinating happened. Rather than erasing the midwinter celebration, Christian leaders gradually absorbed it. Yule became Jule, still recognized across Scandinavian languages today. The timing aligned conveniently with Christmas, which celebrated the birth of Christ. Early Christian leaders understood that attempting to abolish such a deeply rooted festival would provoke resistance. So instead they shaped the holiday into something that appeared new, but still felt familiar. Many of Yule's symbolic elements were woven seamlessly into the Christian midwinter feast. The emphasis on light returning to the world found new expression in the birth of Jesus, the light of the world. The tradition of gathering in the darkest season remained intact. Even many local customs, bringing greenery into the longhouse, hosting feasts, lighting candles and exchanging gifts, continued, now reframed within the Christian calendar. But this blending was not always peaceful. In some communities, tensions rose. A Christian household might refuse to participate in a blot, causing unease among neighbours who feared offending the gods or spirits. A chieftain who embraced Christianity might ban sacrifices, prompting quiet resistance or whispered disapproval. Still, Yule proved resilient. It survived not by remaining rigid, but by adapting. In time, what had once been a purely pagan solstice celebration transformed into a hybrid season, one that honoured both the Christian narrative and the older rhythms of the land. Conversion did not erase belief in the old gods overnight. In far-flung farmsteads and isolated mountain valleys, devotion to Odin, Thor, Freyr, and the spirits of the land persisted for generations. Families continued to carve protective runes, honor household spirits, and tell ancestral stories during Yule, even as they attended church or embraced Christian teachings. Children grew up hearing both the saga of Christ's birth and the tale of the wild hunt riding across the winter sky. Some practices shifted subtly. Instead of leaving offerings for the house spirit, a family might place a candle in the window to guide travelers, including, symbolically, Christ's light. Instead of a solstice blot, a family might share a special meal after attending a church service. But the spirit of Yuletide, the warmth, the togetherness, the reverence for returning light, remained unchanged. There were moments of conflict. In some regions, Christian leaders condemned Yule feasts that felt too pagan. In others, the old traditions quietly outlasted religious decrees. What emerges from the historical record is a world negotiating two identities, and in doing so, creating something new. Perhaps the most enduring example of this blending is the very word Yule. Long after Christianity became dominant in the north, the word remained, tying the modern Christmas season to its ancient pagan roots. Even today, Scandinavian languages use Yule to describe a holiday season filled with candles, greenery, feasts and gathering, echoes of rituals practiced more than 1,000 years ago. By the end of the medieval era, Yule had fully transformed into a Christian-centered celebration, yet its origins continued to shimmer beneath the surface. The emphasis on community, the lighting of candles, the sharing of food, and the symbolism of hope reborn. These remained deeply connected to the rhythms of the land and the memory of older beliefs. In many ways, this blending preserved the heart of Yuletide. Instead of vanishing, its ancient spirit simply took on new meaning. Where once people toasted Odin or Freya, they now raised cups in celebration of Christ. Where once they honored their ancestors through the solstice night, they now gathered to share in a season of peace and goodwill. But the feeling, the warmth of the hearth, the joy of coming together in the darkest time of year, the sense of wonder at light returning, remained unchanged and enduring. The Norse people of the year 1000 lived through a time of great change, but Yule remained a constant. It connected them to their past, guided them through their present, and shaped the celebrations that future generations would come to know as Christmas. As our journey through the Norse Northlands draws to a close, we find ourselves once again standing at the threshold of the longhouse. The fire within still glows softly, its embers pulsing with quiet warmth. Outside, the winter night stretches endlessly across the snow-covered fields, dark and deep and ancient. Yet even in that vastness, the world does not feel empty. It feels alive with memory, with myth, with the echoing footsteps of all those who celebrated Yuletide long before us. To understand Yule as it was known 1,000 years ago is to understand a people who lived in intimate dialogue with the land. The Norse faced winters that tested the limits of endurance, surrounded by mountains, fjords, and forests that seemed carved from the bones of creation itself. And still, in the heart of the darkest season, they gathered to share light, warmth, food, and faith. Yule was not merely a festival. It was a response to nature's greatest challenge. It was a declaration that even in the longest night, the human spirit could kindle a flame. When we look back at Yule through the eyes of those who lived it, we see a celebration shaped by many layers. It was practical, the moment when carefully stored food sustained the household, when fire kept danger at bay, when families huddled together against the cold. It was communal, an occasion that softened the boundaries between farmsteads, brought guests through snow-covered paths, and reaffirmed the essential bonds of kinship. It was spiritual, woven through with beliefs in gods, ancestors, and spirits whose presence felt closer during the long, enchanted nights of midwinter. Above all, Yule was a festival of meaning. Every flame symbolized the sun's return. Every story retold the memory of ancestors. Every carved rune, every evergreen branch, every shared cup carried the weight of tradition. In the Norse worldview, the cosmos itself leaned toward rebirth at the turning of the year, and the people celebrated not just survival, but hope. Even as Christianity spread through Scandinavia, reshaping old customs and infusing them with new significance, the core spirit of Yuletide endured. The names changed, the rituals shifted, but the heart, the impulse to gather, feast, reflect, and kindle light in the darkest time, remained constant. It is that heart which survived through centuries of change, threading through medieval celebrations, weaving itself into modern Christmas traditions, and lingering today in Scandinavian Yule, still a season rich with candles, greenery, and the glow of winter magic. Perhaps that is what makes Yule so enduring. It speaks to something universal. No matter the era, no matter the faith, human beings have always felt the need to mark the deep midwinter with ceremony, to gather, to share warmth, to acknowledge the darkness, and then to celebrate the light that edges slowly back into the world. The Norse did this through fire, feasts, songs, and stories. We do it today through twinkling lights, shared meals, and moments of quiet reflection. Across 1,000 years, the impulse remains the same. As you picture the longhouse one last time, imagine the scene at the end of a Yule night. The fire has burned low, flickering gently across the sleeping faces of the household. Cloaks and blankets are pulled tightly around shoulders. Outside, the wind carries the faint sound of trees groaning under the weight of snow. And yet within these wooden walls, peace endures. The darkness is no longer something to fear. It is something that cradles the gentle glow of the hearth. Before we close, I want to thank you for joining this journey into a winter world shaped by myth, memory, and resilience. If you enjoyed traveling through time tonight, I warmly invite you to comment below and share where in the world you're listening from. Your voices help bring these stories to life. And if you'd like to experience holiday history ad-free, or gain access to bonus content, early releases, and behind-the-scenes material, you can visit our Patreon. Your support helps keep these cozy historical journeys burning bright, just like the Yule fires of old. Until next time, may your home be warm, your nights peaceful, and your winter filled with light.